Hey everybody, a couple different things that you're going to be looking at this week. We are going to be building story packages, and we can do this in a couple different formats. And I'm going to have a few different video explanations for you. This one, which is relatively old, you can see the deadline or the date line on the story is 2010. This is one that I have shared with my students before, and I just re-recorded some of the audio, but I thought it works pretty well because, in part, it's an example from a high school publication, and so we'll take a look at sort of how to build a story package and some things that you might think about as you're doing that. I'll have another video for you to watch that'll be me sort of actually working through in InDesign how to do this and thinking about some things with that. So you'll take a look at that one as well. I also have one that I've shared often with my students from timharrower.com. Harrower is the author of the newspaper designer's handbook that you've been using so far this semester. On timharrower.com, there's a story building project or example that's pretty good as well that I've actually I currently share with my students too. So I'll put the link in there. It's not one that I did, but I'll put the link in there so you can watch that as well. And then your job this week is to actually create a story package. So basically, we're just kind of walk through, like, this will be a kind of a quicker one, and we'll sort of take a look at like where you start and where you go from there. So you can see this first slide is very basic, right? You've got a headline and you've got a story that's not even in columns. It doesn't look like anything special, and that's no photos or anything. So you might start in a place like this. You might also start with the photo and build around that as well, and we'll talk through that when we do the other tutorial. So once you have that kind of put on your page, you can see how this sort of looks even different, kind of a straight news story, but we've added a deck, right, to this, and we've also put the story in columns. Liz Sawyer, who was the student who wrote this story about her superintendent at the time taking another job, I actually just had breakfast with this morning. She is a reporter now for the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, and as part of the reason that I remember that I had this video, so has gone on to be a very successful journalist, covers a lot of protests and things, and does a lot of cool straight news. And this is where she got her start, was as part of the Murmur staff when I was an advisor at Waterford Kettering High School. So you see how we've got still the basic elements, but it's starting to actually look a little bit more like an actual news story that you might see in a news publication. Here we have added a photo. It's just a mugshot, not much to it, but we do have that. And we've also added within the story what's called a pull quote, and the story wraps around it. You notice how the story wraps on both sides of it, as opposed to going straight through the column and forcing the reader to jump over it to continue reading. It flows around pretty nicely on the left and the right hand side, so that the flow of the story is not actually interrupted. And we've messed a little bit with doing a display headline and doing some different things there. So you've got a good example of contrast. We've changed the headline to a sans serif font. We've added a really large sort of display head. The superintendent at the time was named Rob New, and so we kind of play on his name a little bit, and we do this out with the new. And that's the addition for this one. Now we've just kind of rearranged where the headline elements are, and we're leading into the headline with the deck in front of it instead of underneath it. Again, we've just sort of rearranged some things and now put the picture on the right-hand side instead of the left. All right, so this looks like something that probably could run in a publication. It looks like it could be done. And now we're looking at using some reverse text and thinking through things a little differently. You can see how we've got now a hole here on the lower left-hand side. And we'll have to figure out something to do with that, because everything needs to be in modular shapes. Everything should be in squares and rectangles and not in weird sort of L's. But we've got that. We've got a pull quote still. This one now, the reader is forced to jump over it. It doesn't seem too distracting or complicated in terms of sort of figuring out where that should go. Right, we've reversed the text and added the box to sort of complement the story, and we've also boxed the whole package now in case things feel like they're starting to float off in other directions. We've got a box around the whole thing. We can think a little bit about different colors for this, depending on what sort of color scheme we might want to use. Here's one with green, And here's the same package with yellow. And then the same package again with this red. Now I've put everything in the headline in red instead of the white and the red. And then here we've gone back to the version before with the white and the red used together. We've also added these little red quotation marks to the pull quote to sort of enhance that repetition that we've got on the spread. Okay, we've still got that box, so we've got to figure it out. That's the next slide. So we have a map showing where Waterford is and where he was going to. Federal Way is the district and however many miles that was. And we've got kind of a goofy little graphic info box that we're using to sort of go with that. We also have we've done what's called chunking the story, putting in a couple of decks or subheadlines within the story to sort of break that into different compartments. But you've got a package that sort of works, right? This new is now coming out of it and it's text wrapped around. We've got a package that seems to make sense. So if you had a tabloid publication, this might be the whole thing, the whole page. We can think differently about cropping those photos. Tight cropping is something that we are seeing more of now in terms of thinking through how that headline box should look. Okay, and different placements in terms of where that text might be. Here's one that's cropped vertically you may or may not like. We went through one version of this where we just use his eyes and looks a little nefarious, so I don't think we ended up using that one, but just to kind of show you some other things that we might do. Okay, so we'll get more into this assignment, but your goal this week, your job, now we're getting out of the graphics notebook and into actually doing some real newspaper or magazine design. Okay, so a brief version, you're creating a modular layout of a story. I'm going to give you the story idea and all of the pieces that go with that, the actual story, and some photos and cut lines and things that you're going to use, and you're going to create that into a package. The goal would be, again, to use the package that makes the most sense for you. So obviously, if you're already teaching and you're out of school and you're using, you are a tabloid or you're a magazine size, I'll have those templates in there so you can sort of pick that one, or if you've already got one that exists, you certainly can use that as well. But I want to make sure it's useful for you, so you're working through the process the way your students would be as well. So again, there'll be a couple other things to explain and clarify how this works. This is kind of a quick version. We'll go through how to actually set up grids and work through that in the other slideshows. So you'll take a look at that. And again, this will be your week 3 assignment due no later than 11 o'clock on Sunday evening. All right, thanks.